Picture this. It's a normal shift, you're at the window, helping someone with their order. Nothing complicated, just another combo meal. Someone deciding between fries and nuggies, asking a quick question, tapping their card, the kind of interaction you barely register 5 minutes later. There's a constant flow of people through the drive-thru. In the background, the fryers are going. There's that constant noise you stop hearing after a while. You hand over a receipt, turn slightly to call something back to the kitchen, and then something moves where there shouldn't be movement. Someone in a light pink shirt has run through the kitchen and is charging at you with a rage-contorted face. At first, you can't quite comprehend what you're seeing. And then, someone is pulling your hair, throwing you around your workspace, yelling about ketchup packets. Hi everyone, I'm Leah, and welcome to another episode of True Crime Culinary, a podcast where we look at true crime through the lens of food, because sometimes the smallest details end up mattering the most. This week actually started with a $10 meal I was making for the TikToks, a delicious shepherd's pie type thing. And as I was going through the recipe, I saw a note to add ketchup if you wanted more flavor, specifically umami. Umami is kind of a deep, meaty flavor you notice but don't always taste individually. Other ways you can get umami are kind of like soy sauce or anchovies. So when I saw ketchup, it got me thinking, where does ketchup even come from? And friends, you are not going to believe this. I'll never look at ketchup the same again. Hey, if you've got a fun true crime story and want me to share it on an episode, or you have a food you want me to learn about and then talk a bit about it on True Crime Culinary, email me at truecrimeculinary@gmail.com, all one word, at the Gmails. Now, let's get dippy. So where does ketchup even come from? Despite being a US staple associated with fries and hamburgers, ketchup didn't start in the States. The word starts showing up in print in the late 1600s, spelled like cat and chup in like the 1690s, and later cat and sup in the 1700s. Before that, the word is a Chinese word. If you're new here, my skill set is not pronunciation. So we're going to go with ketchup. We're going to go with kê-tsiap. And we're just going to hope that that's correct. K-E with a hat on top, T-S-I-A-P, kê-tsiap. A Chinese term used for fermented fish sauce, and it wouldn't have been tomatoes. It is salty, strong, deeply savory, and more like soy sauce or fish sauce than anything you'd put on fries these days. Kê-tsiap spread through Southeast Asia, and by the 1600s, British traders came across it and brought the idea back to Europe. Not the exact sauce, but kind of the concept. A preserved, umami-heavy liquid that you add to food to make it better. And once it gets to England, it kind of becomes whatever people make it, meaning it wasn't always from the same ingredients. And this is where we go back to the words in print. Although we see the printed terms showing up in the late 1600s, in the 1700s, ketchup isn't one thing. There's mushroom ketchup, walnut ketchup, oyster ketchup, question mark, exclamation. Then salty, sometimes fermented, sometimes not. Used more like seasoning, added into dishes, mixed into sauces, layered into cooking. I presume something along the lines of like a Caesar salad dressing, where classically you put in anchovies and mix it in. All in all, this ketchup or kê-tsiap concept is flexible, but it's very inconsistent, and it doesn't always keep well. So people are still kind of looking for something better. Now, you might be like, hey, wait a second, ketchup is red, like tomatoes. Yes, but tomatoes aren't from Europe. They do, in fact, come from Latin America, specifically regions along the Andes, modern-day Peru, Ecuador, and northern Chile. Did you know that? Presumably people in Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela did, but I did not. So, learn something new every day. However, indigenous communities had been using them long before Europeans ever saw them. The Aztecs were known to use tomatoes in cooking. I did not know that either, and how cool is that? The word tomato itself is a Nahuatl, I probably said that wrong too, Nahuatl word, same as avocado and chocolate. So, all the good stuff. Now, when Spanish explorers bring tomatoes back to Europe in the 1500s, people are actually just plain sus. They're part of the tomatoes are part of the nightshade family, and some related plants are toxic. There was also a belief that tomatoes were poisonous, and it's likely because old plates had lead in them, and so tomatoes are acidic, and they probably drew some of the lead out, so people were genuinely getting sick or dying from eating tomatoes, and therefore people assumed they were toxic. So for a long time, people basically just grew tomatoes for fun, for decoration, not for food. It takes a while for people, maybe like a casual couple hundred years, for the idea that tomatoes are toxic to shift. By the early 1800s, especially in the US, tomatoes start becoming more normal to eat, safer, more accepted, and easier to grow. Once that happens, they spread across Europe, back through trade routes, and into different cuisines. As I was doing the research, I was like, hey, wait a second. What do you mean Italy didn't have tomatoes since forever? I did check when Italy starts using tomatoes, and I think it was in the 1700s. So they also took a second to kind of get comfortable with the non-toxic fact. Something else I didn't know, China is the largest producer of tomatoes in the world. Now, back to history. In 1812, James Meese publishes one of the first known tomato ketchup recipes in the US. Before you go hunting down that recipe, early versions sometimes included anchovies, which again is common for umami, and insects. Insects were definitely on the list. So, if you want to get into that, you let me know how it goes. In any case, he calls tomatoes love apples, which is absolutely delightful. And he started using tomatoes because they bring a natural acidity, which also helps preserve the sauce. That was something that people struggled with some of the older versions of kê-tsiap or ketchup. Natural glutamates, which boost umami, and a balance of sweet and savory. So suddenly ketchup starts to feel more complete, less like something you add into food and more like something you can add on top of it. Recipes start showing up in magazines in the 1820s, then they're being sold more widely by the 1830s, and by the mid-1800s, they move away from anchovy-based versions. But it's still kind of inconsistent. Recipes vary, some spoil quickly, some use unripe tomatoes, some are thin, some are thick, which is where Heinz comes in. It takes until 1876 for things to get to the dude who started Heinz, which is Henry J. Heinz, and he introduces his version of tomato ketchup. The Heinz company itself was founded in the late 1800s in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He started by selling things like horseradish and pickles, but this early business actually failed. So he went bankrupt in 1875 and then a year later relaunched it as Heinz, and then he focused on ketchup. Here's what made Heinz kind of a winning concept. First, he used ripe tomatoes. I know, a crazy idea. But it had better flavor and consistent color. He used more vinegar, which meant that things could have a longer shelf life and therefore were safer. And he used sugar. This helped to kind of balance everything out. Now, later, Heinz also developed their own tomato varieties, which is crazy to me because these varieties, the seeds they make to create the tomatoes they use, trace back to where? The Galapagos, not just for marine iguanas and tortoises, also tomato production. There's one crucial thing that Heinz also did that you might be thinking of every time you think of ketchup, and it is the clear bottle. Beyond the flavors and the tomato choices and the tomato production, Heinz made a very smart decision, and that was to focus on packaging. They made the classic hexagonal glass bottle, and that really helped popularize ketchup for two reasons. One, they could mass produce the bottles. This is kind of like a la Henry Ford time where you could make things fast and at scale. They kind of pioneered that bottle itself. Second, it was clear, literal brand transparency. So when you think of the history where people are like, is it going to go bad? Does it have insect parts in it? You are now able to see a bright red product, very consistent on the shelves. It draws the eye. It's very satisfying to dump out, etc., etc. Overall, the bottling of the ketchup really helped people feel more confident and comfortable eating this type of product when they have had a very kind of like shaky relationship with tomatoes before that. The success of Heinz ketchup is reflected in the fact that it is one of the only condiments allowed on the International Space Station. There's a couple other cool things, or interesting things rather, about Heinz, which is that part of what made Heinz stand out is the workforce. Heinz factories employed large numbers of women, which was very notable at the time. Yes, unfortunately, men still held most executive roles, but women were central to the production process, which again at the time was not always the popular vote. Women worked in roles like sorting tomatoes, peeling, bottling, and quality control. These jobs required consistency and attention to detail, which matched the product he was trying to standardize. He also made a point of promoting the factory as clean and orderly. Compared to other industrial workplaces at the time, Heinz emphasized hygiene, uniforms, and structure. that wasn't just about working conditions, it was also about the brand. Because again, remember the history is that people are like, I don't know what to expect from ketchup, and also tomatoes might kill me. So fair, yeah, let's kind of like make people feel better about the production itself. You might be thinking, is Heinz the only producer of ketchup? And the answer is no. There's also Heinz, who also started in the late 1800s out of California. But their version was a bit thinner, less popular. I think I was watching a YouTube video where it said that McDonald's tried to switch to Heinz and basically people revolted and wanted Heinz. So there's a very strong preference for Heinz, but Heinz also exists. So in my recipe, the reason why ketchup is used is because it hits all four of like the perfect four things in flavor. It's got acid, sugar, salt, and umami. Those four elements help fill gaps. So something that is kind of flat gets brighter with ketchup. If something is too sharp, ketchup can kind of soften it. And if you just don't have a ton of seasoning in it, it can kind of add a little bit of punch, which is why it's really great for things like budget-friendly chicken pot pie, turkey pot pie. Put a few dollops of ketchup in there and you've got a much deeper flavor than if you didn't use it. But let's go back to, I think it's a Wendy's, where this poor woman is getting beat up by the lady in the pink shirt. Now, she's literally, I believe, getting her head smashed onto the counter. The pink shirt lady is pulled off of the worker by her partner. In the article, it said either her boyfriend or her husband, who had followed her into the Wendy's. They had gotten in through a back door of the Wendy's, which was propped open. They ran in, this pink shirt lady was like, give me the ketchup! And like, okay. She was later arrested. The worker was pretty beat up, which is super bummer. But overall, can we all agree? Therapy is super great because the alternative, at times, can be that you lose your damn mind over some ketchup packets. Kind of a crazy story, huh? Going all the way from the Andes Mountains where tomatoes are created to Chinese kê-tsiap made from anchovies to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the International Space Station, and later to a Wendy's. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of True Crime Culinary. Make sure to join me next week. Every Thursday, there's a bite-sized episode. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen.